Hey there, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 80 with Burck Smith, who is the CEO and founder of StraigherLine, a company, a higher ed tech company here locally in Baltimore, doing great work nationally. So I was really excited to catch Burck for a brief conversation here, and hope to be able to meet him in person, visit their offices soon, since I recorded this a while ago before all the stuff currently that's going on. So I'm just kind of working through my library of content. Don't have much, many other places to be right now other than just kind of working from home and hanging out under social distancing and physical distancing and all that kind of good stuff. So still glad that I can put out this great content for you. Appreciate you all so much for listening. I know podcasts are giving me quite a bit of comfort right now, and seeing a lot of people still creating some really great content, even though we're all stuck at home. So yeah, without further ado, this is episode number 80 with Burck Smith. Cool. Well, thanks again so much for jumping on for the podcast here. I live in Baltimore, so I've heard a lot about StraigherLine, so I'm excited to learn more about your story and all the great work that you're doing and your team is doing and everything. So we will start at the beginning, though, if you want to give everybody a brief introduction of who you are and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. My name is Burck Smith. I am currently the CEO and founder of StraigherLine. And if I go back to the beginning, the long story for the professional journey is in the mid 90s. I was in grad school and for public policy, and was really interested in what technology should do for education. And this was, internet had become a thing in like 1992. Obviously been around forever, but it hit the popular culture about 1992, 93. And so people were trying to figure out what the internet was going to do to the world. And I was interested in education. And it seemed to me that online delivery is much cheaper than face-to-face. So that should solve some of the problems we'd identified, particularly in higher ed, but also in K-12. And even then, the problems of high prices, of high debt, of non-completion of debt with no degree were already there, and they've only gotten worse. Mm-hmm. And as I thought more about how that might play out, it became clear to me that it was unlikely that colleges were going to lower their prices themselves because of how the industry was structured. And there was an opportunity for someone to do it, not just an opportunity, but if it was going to happen, someone was going to have to force that. And so started an online tutoring company in 1999 called Smart Thinking. And the idea behind Smart Thinking was that you aggregate the demand for tutors and the supply of tutors, and then can create a service into which colleges can buy. And it worked. And it also paved the way for StraigherLine by creating essentially an academic labor model that could support StraigherLine's coursework. And today, Smart Thinking is still around. It's maybe the largest online tutoring provider in higher ed. Pearson owns it. StraigherLine started as a division of it in 2008 and then became its own company in 2009. That was 4 years before MOOCs. That was before boot camps, before prior learning assessment became as big as it is. And the idea behind StraigherLine was that general education coursework is highly standardized across schools, represents about a third of all enrollments in higher ed, and is highly transferred among schools. And so there's an opportunity to really reduce prices for students if you could create low-cost general education pathways. So that's what StraigherLine did. We offer about 60 of those courses, $99 a month. By pricing it at a low price and on a subscription basis, it's low cost and low risk. For colleges that work with us, it is a way to attract new students, increase yield, and increase persistence. And we've done a few things over the last few years that have evolved that, but the core is still reasonably similar, is that students can take online gen ed coursework very affordably, lower the price and risk of a degree, or increasingly colleges send students to us to do that and increase yield and persistence. And so fast forward, 2020, we enrolled about 35,000 students last year, growing reasonably quickly. We're not the only ones in the space anymore. There's lots of others, MOOCs, competitors to us and more. And this kind of alternative credit pathway, if you will, or non-traditional provider is increasingly popular.
Yeah, and that's just an incredible story. And I guess, I mean, a couple of things that you're saying there, I'm just kind of curious, to dig in with. But because I think, yeah, like you were saying, like there's definitely a, like on like the positive side, the idea of these institutions, these colleges and universities have been around for a very long time, and they've done things, the same way they've been doing them for a very long time. And, kind of coming in with a different perspective to kind of drive some change, but still be working with those institutions, like working with their sort of, their brands and their credibility, and like really kind of shepherding students with that really good, flexible, low cost option and everything. Yeah, just like so great for me. And I think, I guess what I'm curious in terms of like, coming in with the, it's from what you were kind of saying, like, it sounds like you were sort of observing from the outside, these sort of issues and everything. So I'm curious, like, part of your own origin story to kind of zoom in a little bit of like with your own college experience and all that learning and, the community building, anything like that you were doing, when you were in college, like, how do you feel like that still resonates with you today in terms of, the work that you're doing, or just kind of how you operate and work with other people, or anything, just whatever comes to mind in terms of that part of your own origin story?
Yeah, I don't think my college origin story is what drove my perspective on higher ed today. I had a fabulous college experience. Went to Williams College, 4-year traditional student, the standard, what used to be the standard journey, which is graduate at 18, go to college for 4 years, come of age. My major was political theory, so it was very philosophical, and it was great. And but that wasn't the problem that we were having as an industry in the late 90s and thereafter. The problem was around price and debt, and then also non-traditional students who had not necessarily been successful the first time around, and we were trying to figure out how to make them successful. And students who have have gone into the college system, the higher ed system, and stopped out at some point, and are older, have very different priorities than the 18 to 22-year-old. So I had a wonderful college experience, but I don't think that's really what drove certainly the StraigherLine and smart thinking, and is also not what's driving the sort of the higher ed market today.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's good at least not like having the self-awareness that it's kind of like different from where we are now, because I think that it can be holding people back, where it's just like, oh, what I had is what everybody else should have, or that's the one and only way, or something like that. So it's at least good, refreshing. But because I always just like hearing if there are, and I think it's interesting, when people kind of recognize like, well, it's interesting, I didn't have it, and it may be that like it's if it's like, well, I went into it maybe not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but I just kind of was like coasting and wanting to really empower students now to again, just be able to go into it with, less risk, and those sort of, like you can go through and kind of get gen ed courses out of the way, and maybe still be able to work and not have to like disrupt your life or anything like that. There's a lot of good opportunities. I think, even if it's not like, oh, like these life-changing moments for me in college or something like that, it's just like, well, I kind of just like did the thing that everybody else did, but, I'd want other people to be able to really like feel empowered to, go into higher ed with more, I guess. Like,
yeah, I wish I wish I had that story. It isn't.
Yeah.
No, mine, it was very much, in grad school for public policy, and looking at kind of a big social problem and trying to fix it. And less about, hey, here's my experience and I want to replicate it, or, I want to, or either replicate it or fix what was my experience, but is more that we have this problem of price and debt and lack of success. And there seem to be tools that can help with that. And actually there are models for that in other industries, but it's not happening in higher ed for good reasons. And how do we then fix that? And so I think in an alternate universe, I would have ended up in nonprofits or government somewhere. But the way to attack this problem was to start a company to kind of prove it, because the entities, typically foundations and government and colleges, aren't built to look at themselves self-critically if the problem is their kind of ongoing funding structure, which is sort of prohibiting change.
Well, then, that does, you've talked a lot about the work that you're doing now with StraigherLine. So, you've been at this for, I guess like a decade. So like,
Yep.
it's obviously a very big, complex problem that you're working at solving and everything. So what kind of, what do you enjoy most about your current work? Like what's keeping you engaged and excited or anything like that, I guess that you'd want to explore a little bit with the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff. It's really three things. When we started, it was very much targeted at students who had not yet figured out where they wanted to go to college. So they would come to us, take coursework, and then transfer their credit to the colleges with whom we had agreements. And that's working, and it's still a chunk of our students, so it is the minority of our students who are using us for that purpose. Over the past 6 or 7 years, we have started working with colleges where they send us students. So colleges have students that they can't admit right away for whatever reason. They may need prerequisites. They may need math and writing help. They may not be ready for online. They may want to start immediately, but the semester doesn't start till a certain date for whatever reason. Or they have students that are already enrolled and are at risk. They're running up against financial aid caps or need summer scheduling or don't want to maintain the 2-course minimum for financial aid eligibility or need to rehabilitate their academic profile, or dropouts who have some of the same problems but are thinking about coming back in. And so for the past 6 or 7 years, we've been working with schools where they refer those students to us. They take some coursework, and then if successful, they return. We have great outcome data about how that impacts yield for colleges as well as persistence. That's really exciting. So in addition to having students being referred to us, really last May, we started white labeling that. So we're doing it under a school's brand as opposed to under our brand. And the principle is that, by lowering the cost and risk for students to solve their problems, you're able to solve them in ways that traditional delivery can't. So that's one thing that's been interesting. And then second, we are also now working with employers where they are offering programs to their employees with StraigherLine coursework comprising about the first half of the degree, either associates or bachelor's. And by doing that, they're able to dramatically lower that price of the first year or two of a degree and front load the savings such that sort of it further decreases the overall cost of a degree. And so we're pretty excited about that. We'll have, with the partner with whom we're working, we'll be launching an associate's degree of nursing, early childhood associate's degree, and an online bachelor's program.
Yeah. And I guess, it's sort of a really good incentive for the employer if it's just like, we have sort of this like pool of money we want to use for, professional educational development and those sort of things. It's like, what's the most sort of, effective way to use those dollars? Because I think that can be a problem where it's like, well, we do have a benefit, but like, obviously again, like the very high cost of, getting a degree, it's like, well, that only gets me so far. So I got to like go like one course at a time with like a traditional sort of model. So yeah, it's really smart if it's just like, like you can get further with whatever sort of funding you have, I guess is sort of what I assume is probably.
It's also going to transform the market, I think. It used to be that tuition reimbursement policies and benefits were, kind of held in the back room, if you will. Employers had them, but didn't really want to use them because it was expensive. So they would reserve it for, mid-level and upper-level employees, and then create all sorts of barriers to actually accessing it. If you drive the price down and front load the savings and drive the price down by 5 or 6 fold, that changes what an employer can think about using these programs for. So now they can push these programs to frontline employees, both as an upskilling option and as a retention value. So changing the price point changes the value proposition that employers have for using this. It also starts to blend what is a fairly arbitrary distinction between training and education. So employers train and colleges educate, but that's kind of arbitrary, and colleges are certainly trying to train and create job skills, and employers are certainly trying to educate. And if you drive the price way down, then and employers are offering coursework through new providers like ourselves and others, then that distinction starts to blur. And so I do think that changing the price for employers over the next maybe 2 to 10 years is really going to change how employers and employees educate.
Yeah, for sure. And then just all those other things you mentioned too, of kind of the like Swiss Army knife of like, how you can help support students, of like all those things you mentioned in terms of really expanding the way that you work with universities to, all of those things I think are, I'm sure, resonating with people, of just those common little sort of hurdles and the barriers and things that just create friction. And, at best it might just slow a student down, or they have to like maybe take a term off and they come right back or something. But it's like, there could be a better way that they, those sacrifices don't have to happen. And it really being kind of, you kind of just whip it out, in terms of just like, okay, well, you're experiencing this issue, so we can kind of use this tool in this way, and really help to, alleviate that for the students. So it's just really cool to hear of just all those different ways that you're, helping students pursue their degrees and everything. So, well, I guess with all of this, like, and maybe just continuing in terms of like just the way that you look at your work and kind of work with your team and everything, like, and maybe it's more personal or more professional, but like, what are you geeking out about right now? If it is like related to your work or things that are just kind of more personally fulfilling, I'm just curious kind of what's grabbing your attention right now.
Sure. Well, some that are sort of related to work and others that aren't, but the sort of related to work is, and this is a personal interest as opposed to a work interest, but applying the same principles to high schools. I wrote a book chapter about it a decade ago, but then haven't done much since. But that same thing, online delivery, online anything should drive the price of delivery down. And what has happened in colleges is over the last 2 decades, colleges have essentially captured the value of that instead of passing it to students in the form of lower prices. The same happens in high schools, but in colleges, there is the model, there's some level of consumer choice. There is a market, a dysfunctional market, but a market nonetheless. That does not exist in high schools. So how do you build something similar to deliver the benefits of any kind of technology use to students? And to be clear, it's not necessarily pro or con online delivery. It is that if someone does choose online delivery, there should be some other benefits that flow from it. And so I'm really interested in how an alternative high school might be built, where for students who have what I've called opted out of high school, and that would be dropouts, chronic absentees, working teens, homeschoolers, et cetera. Those that have chosen not to enroll in traditional high schools, even though it is free. How can you build a different model for them? And my idea is that if you take their per student allocations and let them allocate it to different services, both academic and extracurricular, at different prices. So an expensive face-to-face or an online, a cheap online course, and then the surplus can be used for other relevant services like transportation vouchers or computers or, professional clothing or, OBO lessons or test prep or job skills, who knows what. But it creates a very different way to tailor educational services, to create competition among providers, and to rethink the way we consider quality, or really to move the idea of quality to one of value rather than quality. So that's interesting. I'm kind of pushing around on that personally. Joined a couple of boards of schools here in Baltimore. One's a charter middle school, and one's a private school. So all that's exciting. Non-education related stuff. I've got 3 teenage boys, one of whom is a freshman in college. They keep me busy. And they're also, 14, 16, and 18. The 18's out of the house, so I can start to see the horizon where, I'll have more non-family time or non-kid time with my wife, and I can explore. So that's exciting. Baltimore guy, love the sports teams here. Ravens have been fun. Love the Maryland Terrapins, so I do follow that. Stay in shape reasonably. A lot of outdoor stuff, biking when it's warmer, swimming, hiking, etc. So that keeps me busy.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. And I guess, I have to imagine, just really being like plugged into the Baltimore community too, of just being able to give back by joining these boards and everything, but then also just really, I guess, I don't know, you kind of, I'm sure maybe draw inspiration or just kind of meet people and hear stories or anything like that, of just really being invested in the community of the city and everything. So I think there's just I've been here for now, it's just over 3 years. But yeah, it's just like, I think it's cool to me just seeing a lot of the really interesting work a lot of people are doing. And then, yeah, there's just like so much fun stuff to do too. Yeah, like sports teams and like food and just like all this cool stuff. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I grew up here and then moved back after sort of when I started StraigherLine. I was in Smart Thinking was in DC, and then moved back here in StraigherLine about a decade ago, and love the city, and would love to figure out how to make it better. It's it's a hard thing to do, but certainly doing what I can.
Yeah. Well, then I guess also I'm curious, like anything in particular that you are reading, watching, listening to, like stuff that's, again, maybe personally fulfilling or professionally relevant, anything that comes to mind of, podcast, books, documentaries, anything like that you might want to recommend. We can.
I'm not necessarily recommend. I'm a kind of a omnivorous reader. I actually try not to program my reading too much, or even the sort of take what comes. People give you a book and read that, or sitting around and read that. Sometimes you pick one, you read that. So I'm not, I just serendipitously realized I think 3 of the last 4 books I've read have been about food. So I read a book about the truffle industry, which apparently is there's a lot of deep, dark secrets in the truffle industry, bananas, wine, read books about that. But then generally read a fair bit of sci-fi stuff. I read a lot of fair bit of, philosophy and theory stuff, which is kind of fun. And then kind of more good literature, I guess. Maybe more relevant is what I don't read much of. I really don't read much of the business books. I find that the advice is often contradictory, and so isn't all that useful. So no particular recommendations, but I definitely read a lot as my sort of entertainment and relaxation.
That's cool. And I guess it's helpful in the sense of, like you're saying, not being terribly restrictive on your, like a pretty wide, diverse diet of things to, just kind of activate different parts of, just sort of your perspective or anything of just like looking in the world maybe in a different way. Because I sometimes get caught in that sort of vortex. I think it is like of just the sort of like leadership or business books and stuff like that. So I've been trying to, veer out a little bit. Yeah, because I think sometimes I'm reading them and it's kind of just like, almost like junk food reading or something, because it might just be like, either contradictory or they're all just kind of saying the same things in different ways or something. So it's just maybe not the, most fruitful reading, because I guess it's hard for me too, because it's like I don't really read as much. Like I love podcasts and movies and TV and like, all these other things. So I'll like circle around, just gonna be like, I don't know. I guess this is relevant, but like it's not maybe like the best thing that I should be reading. But
yeah. So I want to do more podcasts and such. I don't do much. I actually, instead will actually read as opposed to listening. But yeah, that's my pastime when my downtime is reading.
Well, then we'll end on the optimistic note that I always love to wrap up on. So what is something or are some things that you're looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world? So anything on your mind, just, that you're optimistic about, looking forward to?
Sure. Well, so I think for all the education work, whether it's higher ed or K-12, there is a lot of doom and gloom about what higher ed looks like, or even K-12 looks like, in the next decade. And I think that is at some level right, because I think our institutions are going to look pretty different, our education institutions. But I think what has to be remembered is that that's really good for students, is that we have a lot of problems that they are facing around price and risk and debt, and these are ways to reduce that. So in many ways, what's happening is very promising for students going forward, which I think is really exciting. I'm eager to watch it unfold. The life, as I mentioned, it is wonderful as a father of 3 teenage sons. Watching them get older and become men themselves is exciting. Go off to college and then also figure out my next stage. And then in the world is intriguing. Who knows? The political situation is chaotic at best, and I don't really have any insight beyond what anyone else might have, but it'd be very interesting to watch how we deal with our current political issues, climate, et cetera, over the next decade. So May you live in interesting times, right?
Right. It's nothing if not interesting, not just like happening all the time. So it's not boring. I guess you could say that for sure.
That's right.
But all good stuff. And I mean, we'll have ways to connect with you and StraigherLine in the show notes. And certainly if there's anything else that you'd want to kind of recommend or send my way to include, we can do that as well. But just so great talking to you and kind of hearing about your story and the great work that you all are doing there and everything. And try and come visit StraigherLine at some point, since right here in Baltimore. But
yeah, please do.
Thank you so much for your time, and just have a good rest of your day.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you for the interview. It was fun.
This podcast is part of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network, bringing together diverse voices in the higher ed community. Check us out on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod or at ConnectEDU.network. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.